To begin today, I want you to take the little piece of cloth that you were given, and I want you to bind your hand together. Either hand will work, just so it's a little uncomfortable. We're not making tourniquets here, but just binding your fingers so they can't easily move. And you can just tuck it in at the end. Sometimes when we avoid talking about topics, we feel a little like our fingers feel right now, kind of bound up. Today, Jesus asks Martha a question. Do you believe this? And the question offers us the opportunity to talk about two topics that we have a tendency to avoid: death and resurrection. In 2 verses, we are offered the most far-reaching promise found anywhere in the gospel. These verses define what relationship with Jesus means to those who embrace it. They're not idle words of hope. They confront the question of death head on. Jesus says to Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? And then Martha responds, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. These verses offer a perspective on life, not of the inevitability of death, but of the irrevocable promise of life with God. And they invite us into a different perspective of life, one where we remain in the full presence of God before, and that means now, and after our death. In life with God, both the physical and metaphysical realities of death are denied power. These verses tell us that the way to experience the power of God's love is simply to believe in Jesus. When Jesus asks Martha, do you believe this? He's asking her to believe 2 things. First, that he's resurrection and life. And secondly, that as resurrection and life, he can overcome the power of death. Jesus wants to know if Martha believes in the fullness of his relationship with God and the effects of that relationship on life. In verse 27, we hear Martha confess, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah. Yet further on, in verse 39, when she refuses to roll away the stone, we realize that she may not be as totally convinced of this confession as she might want us to believe. Her response mirrors many of us in our faith, or maybe I should say in our doubts. Faith is not just an agreement to a series of statements found in the creed. Faith is an assent to the truth of Jesus' relationship with God and the decisive change that that relationship means for those who believe. Faith does not necessarily lie in faith itself, but instead it creates relationship with God. It creates communion with Jesus, and it is in our relationship with Jesus that we receive the gift of life. We seldom talk about death and resurrection outside of funerals and Easter, neither of which really seem conducive to questioning our theological understanding. We need to talk about death and resurrection in the very midst of life, because death at the end of our life is not the only time we encounter it. We experience death and resurrection in many different ways. Let me share some different ways. A young woman asks me to preside at her wedding. We journey through the planning and preparation, and then the week before the wedding, the groom backs out. Death. We can only imagine the pain and hurt this woman feels and her family members. This was the death of a lifelong wedding dream for her. But there is a resurrection part of this story. 2 years later, she meets and falls in love with a wonderful man who truly loves her. They marry, and now she knows what true love really feels like. Resurrection. A young pregnant woman with a baby does not want to leave her husband. She wants that baby to grow up with a father. But this man is physically and emotionally abusing her. And one night, she walks away from everything. She leaves the marriage, her house, her things, and has nothing except the baby. Once again, this is a death story with a resurrection part. A few years down the road, she meets someone wonderful who holds her up and cares for her and her baby and sees her as the child of God that she is. They marry and have a healthy, supportive relationship today. Resurrection. An older man is dying and he knows that he has hurt someone. His words and actions killed the spirit of this other person. Death. He calls this person to his hospital bedside and confesses, "I'm so sorry. This was not your doing. It was all my fault." Talk about loosening the burial wrappings. He died a few years later. But this confession was resurrection. Both he and the person he had mortally wounded were freed from the bondage of brokenness. As disciples, we embrace Jesus as resurrection and life, not just at the crisis point of death, but in the daily moments of our life, because these moments are also lived in the face of death. Every day we see the death of hopes and plans and dreams, not to mention the relationship deaths that come from job changes and moving and life changes and physical death. But remember, we believe in resurrection. Now, unbind your fingers and wiggle them around. They're free. They're free from the bondage of the burial wrappings. We can't eliminate the pain that we experience at the death of someone we love, but we can affirm and reaffirm our faith in the belief that Jesus is the resurrection and the life. And then when we face death, we understand the promises of God in Jesus, and we are so much better to equip and understand and appreciate God's promise of life. Now, this was a long gospel lesson today. Not an easy one to hear, not an easy one to read, but I want you to take a deep breath now, and I want you to listen to a little parable. Okay, take a deep breath and let it out, and another deep breath and let it out. Once upon a time, there was a pond, and in that pond lived some water bugs. They were happy, living far away from the sun. For a long time, they were very busy hurrying over the soft mud at the bottom of the pond. Every once in a while, they noticed that one of their friends would begin to lose interest in hanging around with the other water bugs. And the water bug would begin to climb up a stem of one of the lily pads. And eventually it would climb out of sight, never to be seen again. "Look," said one of the water bugs to another, "Clara is climbing up the lily stalk. Where do you think she's going?" Clara slowly climbed up. Even as they watched, the water bug disappeared from sight. And her friends waited, but she didn't return. "That's funny. Wasn't she happy here? Where do you suppose she went?" No one had an answer, and they wondered about this for a long time. Finally, one of the water bugs, who was a leader in the community, gathered all the bugs together and said, "I have an idea. The next one of us who climbs up the lily stalk must promise to come back and tell us where he or she went and why they left." And so they all promised to return if they found themselves climbing up the lily pad stalk. One spring day, not long after their discussion, the water bug who suggested the plan suddenly found himself climbing up the lily pad stalk. Up, up, up he went. Before he knew what was happening, he had broken through the surface of the water and fell onto a nice, soft lily pad. He was so tired after his climb, he laid on the surface and fell asleep. When he awoke, he looked around with great surprise. He couldn't believe what he saw. A change had happened to his whole body. He no longer looked like a water bug. He had 4 colored wings and a long tail. The warmth of the sunshine dried the moisture on his wings, and he began to move them very slowly until suddenly he began to fly. He was flying above the water. He had become a beautiful dragonfly. Whooping and diving, he flew through the air, sometimes making huge circles. He loved being able to fly. And then the dragonfly came to rest on a lily pad. And he cast a glance down into the pond below. Down there at the bottom of the pond, he saw all his old friends, the water bugs. They were hurrying and scurrying around just like he'd done before climbing the lily pad stalk. And the dragonfly remembered the promise they'd made. The next one of us who climbs up the stalk will come back and tell the others where he or she went and why they left. Without thinking, he darted down toward the water, but just as he hit the surface, he bounced away. You see, now that he was a dragonfly, he couldn't go back in the water. "Can't return," he said in dismay. "I tried, but I can't keep my promise. Even if I could go back, not one of those water bugs would recognize me in my new body. I guess I'll just have to wait until they become dragonflies too. Then they will understand what happened to me and where I went." And the dragonfly flew off happily, joining the other dragonflies in a wonderful new world, sunshine and air. Don't be afraid to talk about death and resurrection. When we talk about them, we are so much more able to weave them into our life. We're no longer silenced by the fear, no longer bound by the strips of cloth. Transformation is grounded in the acquisition of a deeper understanding of life. As we move forward toward Holy Week, may we open our hearts and minds and the minds of those we love to a deeper understanding of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. And Jesus said to Martha, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die." Do you believe this? Thanks be to God. Now, in an affirmation of our faith,